Hey guys, so today I want to talk about using the Bolt score as a subjective way to basically address an athlete, even if you're in the world of like psychology, just kind of really determine where someone's possible state is the moment you're kind of sitting down or starting a workout. I think one of the best things about the Bolt score is it's really quick, doesn't take much equipment, something you can do alone, and it's just a great way to kind of evaluate a little snapshot of like where you're at in this moment in time. And it's something where if you did a measurement every single day, different days, times, based on sleep, stress, all that stuff, it's gonna change a decent amount. But what you start to do is get an idea of like a baseline of where you tend to live at. And two good things come out of that. Like one, when it comes to training your respiratory and just kind of the ability to nasal breathe better, increase in CO2 tolerance, it gives you an idea of kind of where you're at. So if you're taking this score a few days a week, or let's just say every day before you train, it's just kind of a metric you measure to see where you're at. It's a great thing to be able to notice that you start to trend up as far as your ability to buffer more CO2 and your ability to kind of just breathe better. And that's one great thing. The other thing is it's a great thing to determine kind of just where you're at. So let's just say you normally have a Bolt score of 25 or 30, and then all of a sudden you come in and kind of hit a workout today. It's supposed to be heavy legs day, and all of a sudden you're at like 13. That's a really good indicator of like where you're at mentally. Maybe asthma kicked up, it's allergy season, but it really just brings awareness quickly to where you're at the moment relative to kind of where you kind of baseline at, kind of give you some insight as to where you're at. So if you're doing that with yourself, give some good insight. If you're a coach working with an athlete, this is a great tool you can even use in a group, because everyone's just kind of figuring out where they're at relative to self. And if it's something that you're doing constantly, athletes start to have a good idea of kind of where they tend to trend at, and then that gives them a good eye opener as far as kind of where they're at for the day prior to a workout, whether you're hitting cardio or hitting the gym, and just kind of use that as a good kind of indicator of where we're at starting out the day. But for the Bolt score, one of the best things about it is really starts to bring some perspective as far as where most people tend to live. So with the Bolt score, so inhale through the nose, then you're going to exhale all the air out, and then with the stopwatch, you're gonna start. And this is where it's subjective. It's not like this exact science. So if it's about ego, that can sometimes get in the way of like this, but it's like you want to kind of just count as far as until you have the kind of desire to take that first breath. Obviously you can keep holding your breath and be like, oh, no, my number's higher. But I think, relative to self, it's just using it as a way to determine like your air hunger and kind of where you're at as far as your ability to balance CO2 with oxygen in the body. So what we tend to see is people that tend to have low scores, somewhere 10, 20, you're gonna see someone that tends to breathe, 15 to 20 to 30 breaths per minute. What tends to be thought of when it comes to that is someone that tends to not optimize using the diaphragm. It tends to be very much an upper chest breather. So rather than full inhale, exhale, it's almost like a hyperventilation. And that's going to tell you a lot as far as kind of if someone's not running full breaths and they're mouth breathing, like one, they're probably going to tend to be sympathetically driven. They have a hard time balancing their nervous system. Another thing is obviously they're not utilizing nasal breathing. So there could be things, asthma, allergies, maybe they've got a super small jaw, tongue doesn't fit in the mouth well. So as a result, anytime they tend to do any type of breathing, it tends to just default to mouth breathing. This can be a good way for a coach to actually start to introduce just the concept of like working on nasal breathing, getting tongue to the roof of the mouth, getting it off the bottom of floor, which can have profound effects, just helping someone's ability to kind of have a lower resting heart rate all day long. Someone can get their tongue out of the back of their throat now when they're sleeping at night. So these things are huge as far as the types of benefits we can start to get. But when we see numbers like 10, 20, we realize that, especially 10, 15-ish or below, that someone tends to really be an upper chest breather. That's going to be someone you tend to see breathe out of their mouth a lot, or someone that gets into like a zone 3 when doing cardio, they're going to shift out of nose breathing real quick. Obviously for someone that's well conditioned, they're good at keeping kind of everything nasal breathing until they have to shift over from a maximizing wattage from a gear perspective. What we see for people down here is that they tend to shift early because they have the inability to buffer CO2 when it comes to their breathing. So it's kind of one of those things where the sensors start going off like, oh, I can't handle all this CO2, and as a result, we just tend to have this quick breathing out of the mouth rather than someone that can handle the buildup and still continue to nasal breathe and kind of work without feeling like agitated. Usually when someone gets to about 30, what we start to see is a reasonable matchup between CO2 production and elimination. So that just means that basically like the CO2 basically being produced based on like muscle activity, we're able to buffer and get rid of it just as quickly as we're producing it, which means I have the ability to work at a much more efficient rate when I can breathe like this. It means I'm getting full optimization of the diaphragm, and I have the ability to just buffer CO2 way better than someone that's going to be up here. So when someone here is obviously going to probably tend to be a lot more fit than someone here, or you could have two athletes in both categories, but what you tend to see is this person's going to be someone that's nasal breathing versus a mouth breather, and that just tells me even someone up here, if they're a good athlete and they're mouth breathing, like they're just leaving some performance on the floor by not. And then when people start to get up to 40 plus, let's just know that someone has really good ability to buffer CO2, that they tend to be nasal breathers throughout the day. This is someone that's probably got a much better balanced nervous system, someone that's got just the ability to breathe and their body feels comfortable and not stressed in the sense of I'm over breathing all day long, or especially during exercise. But this test is very subjective. Like I said, you can kind of like hold your breath and be like, oh, I'm good, I didn't feel like the need to breathe. Or it's something where you can just be honest with yourself. But I think that's a great way to use this, especially as a coach, or even as an individual, just like taking a baseline. Like maybe you go first thing in the morning, first 5 minutes you get out of bed and literally just measure it, or it's every night before sleep. And then kind of you can start to play around with measuring it throughout the day and just start to see how your numbers vary. And I think you'll start to get an idea of like, hey, this is where I baseline. Start to realize like when you're high, when you're low, and start to pay attention to when the numbers are up, down based off of where your baseline tends to sit, and try to look at base causality of like why are things off, or respecting the fact that, hey, my body's off today. My breathing is half of what it normally is. I'm going to be sympathetically driven. Maybe I'm stressed, didn't sleep well, but respecting what your body's telling you, and maybe you change what you're going to do for the day based on exercise relative to downshifting, because that's what your body needs for the day. But great tool, awesome way for coaches to kind of take a quick snapshot of where an athlete or a client is, or even themselves, and kind of utilize that and just kind of determine a good baseline as far as where you are for the day and kind of where you're at state, and use that as a tool to dictate possibilities for where you're going to go for a workout, or just even take someone for a breathwork session. So hopefully that